hope
Thank
you
you.
can stick around a little bit.
Good,
And
Eric.
Gautam, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Matt. I appreciate being here. So hi, everybody. My name is Gautam Shah. A little background on myself. I actually spent most of my career working at a large IT consulting company called Accenture. I think now there's like 700,000 people in that company. So that's where I spent most of my life. But I used to spend all my holiday time and I spent all my money going on wildlife holidays. So you name it, I've been there. I've spent time with that. I've spent time with that animal. I've had amazing experiences, and there just kind of came a point where it all felt very selfish. Here I am sitting there with penguins or grizzly bears or whale sharks or whatever, and the only one that was benefiting was myself. And so I started to call that something called wildlife gluttony, which was what I was getting involved in. And so there was a point many years ago, or not that many years ago, but that I just said, like, well, at some point this is going to shift. And then there's a story, and then yes, there is that point where I was in Nairobi, also with Accenture, and I eventually quit what I would call my perfectly good job, and decided that somehow or another I was going to get into wildlife conservation. Having been born and brought up in Chicago, but living in Nairobi at the time, I decided, well, it's probably, if I want to get into conservation, it's better I stay here in Kenya. That is where I normally still am, although I'm giving you this presentation from the Netherlands. So I will tell you what I ended up coming up with, and then at the end of my presentation, when I had told Matt, was like, well, we've got a couple challenges that we're always kind of we're kind of working on, and that I'm always spending my time thinking on. I wouldn't mind putting some of those out there and opening up some of our work and seeing what people have to say about those. Yeah. So, like I said, I didn't know anything in the conservation space. Obviously, I had a lot of love for wildlife, and I wanted to convert my background in IT and apply it to the conservation space. And again, there's a whole story here, but I started a company called Internet of Elephants, and ultimately, what Internet of Elephants does is it builds games and digital experiences that tell wildlife stories, and always does that using real scientific data and real conservation data that's already being gathered in the wild. So imagine GPS collars on animals, or eDNA, or camera traps, or all the number of other forms of data that's being collected for research purposes. We think about, how do we take that data, how do we convert that into compelling stories, and how do we bring that to much larger audiences out there. So, a couple of the examples of some of the things that we've done. I won't go through all of these. In 2020, we released an augmented reality game called Wilderverse. It told the stories of apes in Borneo and apes in Congo, and kind of put you in the shoes of a researcher, and brought these animals to you in augmented reality. So you're actually kind of doing the research, walking through the forest, etc., in an entirely augmented reality experience, all the while learning far more about very, very specific animals: Fio the orangutan, Buka the gorilla, Chili the gibbon, and so on. So all of that data was based on data that the Borneo Nature Foundation and the Gologo Triangle Ape Project were gathering anyhow. We've run something for a couple of years with Adidas called Run Wild, where we don't build anything, but we use their fitness app to bring wildlife stories, again, of a real snow leopard, a real tiger, a real pangolin, a real elephant, and bring those stories into their fitness app. So when you go on your run, and you're tracking your own run, you can be comparing your run to the actual distance and the actual movements of real animals in the wild, and therefore get a better understanding of what their life is like. And then Unseen Empire, is a game that we created. It's based on 5 million camera trap images that were gathered in Southeast Asia on a big clouded leopard study. It was a 10-year study. All of that information, all of this incredible camera trap data and information was going into scientific journals. Nobody gets to see it, right? And so we thought, like, how can we gamify this? How can we create an experience that allows you to see these camera trap images, but in a much more gamified way, so that the work and the incredible work that people are doing actually gets out in front of a lot of other people. We're currently working, the project that we're working on right now is with the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. They have underwater rovers all over the ocean. They're collecting millions and millions of images from all depths of the ocean. Eventually, they need to train AI to try and categorize these images. Instead, right now, there's 5 people that are trying to do that. And so we're working with them to create a little bit more of a citizen science game that, again, this is another game where you're trying to look at these images, but kind of make that available to a much larger public and let the public get very, very involved in the actual, the training of the AI and helping to identify and hopefully kind of categorize, all animals under the earth. Or sorry, not under the earth, under the sea. Everything that we do, it's always in partnership with conservation organizations. Sometimes they're one-person outfits. There's like just one lady and she's just working with pangolins in the Masai Mara, and other times, it's much larger organizations that are out there. But everything that we do, we're not the ones that gather the data. We're not the ones that make the sensors. We're not the ones that do that, but we're the ones that work with the organizations that are already doing that to try and figure out how to bring their data, how their stories to to a much bigger audience. So now I'll take a step back. Like, why are we doing this? Why are we looking at games? Why are we trying to tell the stories of science, to a much larger audience? And I think one of our biggest insights, or my biggest insights, as I started to make this transition was, we all know the numbers around loss of biodiversity and loss of wildlife species. But, in the same period of time, are we doing anything different in how we're trying to engage the public with this? And my perspective is no. Like, we're doing the same exact things today as we've been doing for the last 50 years, for the last 70 years. We are using primarily 2 means to engage the public. One is donation campaigns, and 2 is wildlife documentaries. And while both of these have a place, and there's things that they can accomplish, they're still, they're generally quite antiquated in the way that we treat people and the way that we communicate with people. They don't broaden the tent. They kind of are very, very happy to kind of go after the same audiences over and over and over and over again, and they're just kind of lacking behind in everything that's going on from a technology standpoint. So we've always just, we've just kind of felt that if we just kind of continue to try and engage people in the same ways that we were trying to engage them 70 years ago, we are never going to broaden the tent, and we are never going to deepen the level of engagement that the public has. And, the cynical part of me would just say, like, yeah, the next 100 years are going to be continuous symptom fightings. We're going to be having the same conversations in more dire situations, because we've not managed to kind of get everybody on board, make conservation, make biodiversity, something that everybody can participate in. And why do I talk about public engagement? Ultimately, I believe we believe that it has such a significant impact on all the downstream aspects of biodiversity and all the interventions that we're trying to accomplish. Consumer markets and what people buy, what's available for sale, the sustainability of those products has a massive impact on the current state of the planet. Obviously, public policy and our policies friendly towards environment, our policies, I wouldn't, not necessarily unfriendly, but not advantageous to biodiversity. Well, that's entirely determined on how people vote. And then, of course, the amount of financing that's available is of course a big influencer on what type of on-the-ground interventions can happen. So each of these areas, the markets, the policy, and finance, it's entirely, for the most part of the world, it's driven by whether people, what are people buying, who are people voting for, and where are people donating, and they're doing those things, in relation to what their value systems are, in relation to where they're currently engaged, in relation to where their current consciousness is. And quite honestly, that's right now not biodiversity. And it doesn't mean that people don't care. There's always this sense from the conservation world that if only we could get people to care, then everything would be okay. It's not that people don't care. People actually care a lot, but we're not addressing the ambivalence that they have. We're not addressing the anxiety that they have. We're not giving them the opportunity to participate in a way other than clicking a donate button. And so, I'm everything that we do is around this idea of, like, how can we engage the public with biodiversity? How can we engage the public with the environment, with climate change, and other areas? Now, jumping a little bit, we look at like, okay, well, what are the, like I've been talking about, like, how do we widen the tent? How do we deepen the experience? And as I was looking into that, I really just started kind of coming into this area of games and what do people do? What are people doing in their spare time? What are people doing in their in their regular time on their way to work when they get home? And really kind of zooming in on the fact that, well, one is there's more than 3 billion gamers, worldwide, and this number is growing by 5 to 6% each year. And in the mobile space alone, it's growing at 10 to 15%, each year. So almost half the world is playing games, and that transcends every single demographic that there is. That transcends age, it transcends gender, geography, income level. It doesn't matter. But then as we started to kind of look into this a little bit more and say, like, okay, well, what's the profile of these gamers? There's always, there's kind of this feeling that, like, either you're playing games and you're a kid and you're playing games, or, you might, or you're interested in the environment, but there's not a cross section. But actually, we've seen studies that have said that of the gamers, 70% are concerned about global warming, and that's higher than, that's sort of higher than your global average. So there is a crossover between people that are playing games and a little, an environmental bent about them. And even more so than that, we actually found, again, approximately 770 some million of those people above the age of 16 have a self-expressed interest in wildlife. So there's this huge set of people that we're just effectively ignoring, that could make a massive difference, that could change the way they buy, that could change the way they vote, that could change the way that they donate. Maybe not today, maybe today or maybe not today, but certainly within 5 years, certainly within 10 years, if we start actually kind of giving them the opportunity to be activated and to be interested in what's going on. And so, as I kind of looked further into games, I really kind of seeing all the different possibilities of what games can do. They're active. You play an active role. Oh, this is advancing on me, even though I don't want it to. You are not sitting back on you. I mean, you might be sitting on your couch, but you're not just kind of passively watching something. You're part of it. You have an identity and a role. You take on a role. You have. You are an individual or a group that's going after a particular goal. Related to that is you have agency. You get to make decisions. Again, the decisions aren't being made for you. You have the opportunity to influence the outcome of the game, and and that kind of gets directly back into this idea of a feedback loop. This ability, as you make those decisions, to be given feedback about what was the impact of that decision within the game, within yourself, within the identity, and within the role that you played. Games are social. They're things that you can do with other people. In fact, they typically are done with other people. I mean, we're looking at an era where people are watching other people play games and coalescing around different topics in different areas within communities. And another amazing thing is that they're measurable. Everything that somebody does within a game can be measured. You can understand people's attitudes towards a topic from when they started the game to when they ended the game. You can look at the different decisions that they made, the different buttons that they pressed, the different options that they have. And all of that can be measured in a way that can really actually judge engagement with a particular topic in a way that films and other approaches can't do. So Internet of Elephants kind of just looked at all of this, and we really looked at this and like wouldn't be like this future world or this vision that we have is a world where wildlife sort of permeates every aspect, every aspect of your life. What are you doing on a regular basis, and how can we include wildlife into that particular area, whether that's through a game, whether that's through the metaverse, whether it's through virtual worlds, through apps that you're using, like what we did with Adidas. I'm already running. How can I incorporate wildlife content into something that I'm doing? And again, this idea, like how can wildlife kind of be incorporated into every aspect of my consciousness, so that it starts to take the same place at the table as sports or movies or TV or politics. If wildlife is at that same table, and obviously, I'm talking in dreamland here a little bit, but that's what we have to be. That's what we need to be, moving towards. Is that it is that important in your life. It is that much part of your consciousness, that all your decisions are taking that into account. And so that's everything that, personally, my vision around, the entire thing is a world where wildlife is part of your life on an everyday basis. One example I give is, I know, I think in the game Fortnite, Travis Scott had a concert. He did a virtual concert there. 30 million people attended this virtual concert by Travis Scott, which was obviously held in this fictional land. Like, what if that fictional world that he was holding the concert in was the Antarctic, or was the Amazon rainforest, or something like that? And you could get 30 million people integrated into this type of a natural world. And a lot of people kind of push back on me and say, like, you're trying to replace nature with virtual experiences. And I say, like, no, absolutely not at all. What I'm trying to do is inspire people to want to go to these natural places, inspire people to want to save these natural places, not in no way try and replace them. So the types of things that, obviously I showed you a number of the products that we've made. We're really now trying to ask these questions, well, how can we create evidence that people value nature and wildlife, and then use that evidence to influence markets, policy, and giving? How can the metaverse and nature have a symbiotic relationship where nature enhances the experience in the metaverse, and the metaverse in turn kind of gives back to nature? How can these wildlife stories be integrated into education curriculums? Like I said, our big question is, how can we keep audiences engaged with wildlife content for 5 minutes a day, every day? So, it's all these questions around public engagement, the use of technology, and getting people far more connected with wildlife that keeps us up at night, and that kind of keeps us going. And in this way, we are about to now launch what I'm calling the Wildlife Engagement Lab. I haven't yet determined if this is the best name. I don't know if we're the Wildlife Engagement Lab, or Wildlife Engagement Center of Excellence, or Wildlife Engagement Venture Studio, or something. But for lack of a better name right now, we're calling it the Wildlife Engagement Lab. And it is intended, and it exists to try and answer these types of questions. It exists to try and catalyze an entirely new sector of the way that we develop or rekindle relationships between people and wildlife, and hopefully get to the point where, hundreds of millions or billions of people are starting to create direct bonds with animals, and leveraging technology to be able to do that. Essentially the idea of the lab is to, again, take these questions, bring it into our lab. We have expertise in storytelling, expertise in technology, expertise in play, expertise in conservation, and run the type of quick market-based experience that are looking at how can different products accomplish these goals. What are the different business models that we need that can allow these products to be sustainable? And what are the different audiences we can reach? And again, I always kind of come back to that Adidas example. Is wildlife and snow leopards were featured in Runner's World. Yeah, so there's a Runner's World article about wildlife, right? And that's not something that would ever, that would otherwise ever happen. But now we've kind of looked at this audience segment of runners and athletes, and we figured out how to bring wildlife into their life, right? So what are all these different audience segments that we're never thinking about, that we could potentially be reaching if we could figure out how to bring wildlife content into their worlds? So the lab's about to launch. I'm currently doing the things that you need to do in order to launch these things. And if I were to just kind of put out two main challenges that we have, and sometimes we're successful and other times we're not, but these are probably the two things that I'm thinking about the most. One is we found it hard to make the business case and the impact case for public engagement. So it's always been the questions that kind of come back to me is like, well, how will this result in hectares saved? How will this result in orangutans saved? How will this, there's always some measurement, some downstream measurement that a lot of people want, that it's very, very difficult to kind of say like anything that we do is going to result in that, tomorrow or in 5 years. And even if we could, even if it was something that we could do, like, how are you going to create that causality, around it? So everything that we're talking about on the public engagement space is like, yeah, this is systems change that we're trying to accomplish here, right? This is a 20-year goal. But we've either not told the story correctly, or we kind of struggle in this space of just saying that, like, actually public engagement might be the most important thing that we could be working on, but it gets almost the least attention. And the other thing is, like, I have no illusions that Internet of Elephants is going to go out there and do this on our own, or that we're going to just do this on our own with all the conservation organizations that we're working with. We need to bring on other foundational, partners, founding partners, I would say. We want to attract a major game company to come on and be part of the wildlife engagement lab. We want to bring in a major media house to come in and be the one that helps kind of distribute the type of work that's going to happen there. A major research institute or university. Obviously, we're going to need the certain amounts of capital and finance capital to come on board. And so we are kind of just constantly thinking about, like, for what we're doing, what's the right value proposition? How do you frame our work in a way that that makes it a no-brainer for somebody to want to come on board and say, like, yeah, we want to be, we want our name on this lab. We want to be able to provide the type of resources, et cetera, that are going to make this, that are going to make this big and help that vision come true. So much more to say. I love talking about engagement. I love talking about games. I love talking about animals. But maybe I'll leave it there. And Matt, you can tell me what's the right format. But these are the types of things that that we need help with, and we're certainly looking, like I said, for other organizations and individuals to come on board and help make this happen. And I am done. I see, Alex, you have a question.
Yeah. Actually, I since Matt is not speaking, I can fill in the gap.
Yes,
regarding your.
sorry, I took off here a little bit.
No worries.
Alex,
let me
that'd
take
be great to Alex. If you can step in, that'd be great.
Sure. So regarding your making the business/impact case for public engagement, I am currently involved with the Post-Growth Institute, and we host a training which is called the Offers and Needs Market. It's a great vehicle for everyone actually has offers and needs and just wants to have a very human experience. But part of the whole experience and training is that we need to measure how did this change people over time. So we are basically addicted to learning in terms via surveying. And this way we can make this improvement of people that have like either more trust in towards strangers, or are more easily to reach out to someone to ask for help. We can measure this progress in the same way that public engagement to wildlife is something that you could make tangible through surveying as well. Mm-hmm. And this, I was just thinking, for instance, if you have an app or whatever that your material that you make, I think you also track the amount of hours that somebody is engaged with the games that you make. Yeah. You could do like periodic review survey moments and then track over time how they feel towards these elements. And based on that, you can have the proof and validation towards your investor.
Yeah, 100%. So I think that's totally right. Like, we're able to measure engagement. We're not able to measure the end result of that engagement, right? Like, so I can see how much somebody's engaged with this content. I can see how their attitudes are changing. I can see how their knowledge is changing, etc. But as we talk about like impact on policy, impact on buying habits, impact on donations, etc., like, again, that's a long-term play, right? And as soon as you try and make it a short-term play, you start to, I guess, invalidate a lot of what you're doing. Like, if my only goal out of this particular app is to get you to donate, then I will create the whole user experience just to get you to donate, and I'll stop caring about whether I'm really interested in whether you're engaged or not. So we've tried to take this very pure approach to engagement, but that pure approach makes it very difficult to measure sort of the longer term the longer term impacts of that engagement. But I completely agree on what you're saying in terms of how do you measure whether people are engaged, whether you're having some influence on their heart and mind. Absolutely.
I got
Absolutely.
something that I think is applicable here, if you don't mind me jumping in. I read something yesterday that was saying there's the biggest gap ever in polling results on Democrats and Republicans when they're asked if they think we should prioritize the environment or prioritize the economy. And I bring this up because I'm wondering how surveys influence people's thought process. So if you ask that, like, that survey's been, and the question is like basically making it an either or proposition, right? It's either the economy or the environment, right? And that question's been asked like going back years, like at least since the 70s or 80s. And in the 70s or 80s, both Republicans and Democrats were over 50% saying environment, actually, right? Since the 80s, you've seen this split where I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I think it was something like now, a very high percentage of Democrats, 70-odd%, are prioritizing the environment. And with the Republicans, it's like down to like low 20s, right? So you have this huge gap now. And I'm wondering if just the framing of the question, because I think one of you mentioned about polling is like, surveys could be actually educational almost. So just by framing the question one way, have we convinced people that it's an either or choice, either the economy or the environment, and aren't realizing that long term, without an environment and a habitable planet, you actually don't even have a human economy.
Well, I think you're right, Matt. I do think the one is that I'm not sure what's the motivation behind the survey, and some parts of me think that the survey is intended strictly so that somebody can have a news story to be able to talk about the gap, and therefore, if you frame it that way, you will create the news story that you want. But yeah, framing something as an either or always having to frame the environment in relation to in something else, that's exactly what drives people's anxieties. That's exactly what drives people's ambivalence around this. Is there's always this feeling that it has to be an either or, that I have to make a choice. Like, yeah, I could reduce my single-use plastic thing, but I've got so many different things that I need to do, and how can I think about one more thing? I'm going to prioritize what's convenient for me and my family. So I would certainly be much more interested in looking at that question from a different point of view, or from a much more absolute point of view, in terms of what people think about the environment, what people think about wildlife and biodiversity. And that's why I said, like, what we found in the surveys and the data that we looked at, or that other people looked at and then we looked at, was actually, it's actually quite encouraging. And it isn't this either or. It's not either you play games or you're interested in the wildlife. It's not, there's this huge, it's not even, we even looked at gamblers, and people that participate in online gambling. And we're looking at that and we're like, yeah, there's 60 to 65% of the people that participate in online gambling that also have that express interest and care about the environment. So we're not giving people enough credit, and we're actually looking for, I think we're in some ways looking for opportunities not to give them credit.
Yeah, have you looked at like slot machine and other game design, like casino gambling type of design? Because I've seen a few that have animals and whatnot worked in with it, right?
Yeah, well, actually, we just made a pitch to the postcode lottery. in Holland and the UK about a new lottery game associated with animal migrations, and how instead of getting lottery numbers drawn, could you get a GPS location in the ocean, and if a tracked whale swims through your GPS location, you're the lottery winner. Something similar to that. So I also am not. It's one of the big areas that we've looked at is how is that a sector, and how is that an industry that if done ethically can also engage people with the stories of wildlife, but also raise quite a lot of money for conservation.
Sure. So I did doze off there for a little bit. I've been up for many
I can
hours. I
imagine.
got a little bit here and a little bit there. But Alex has some interesting perspectives. I don't know if we covered all the questions and everything related to what you were doing, Gautam, but Alex has some interesting things. I know thoughts on growth and post growth that I think would be useful to introduce the audience to, because I think it has an impact on which companies are going to do well going forward, and which ones might run into headwinds. So where are there tailwinds, where are there headwinds is kind of one of our themes, from an investor angle, right? And obviously, if and I'll give you a little time to think about this if Alex is jumping, and if not, maybe you'll jump right back. But is there an investable angle? Obviously you have your organization, but outside of your organization, do you see any investable angles, either stuff that you should be moving away from because the trends with gaming and wildlife are going to push it in a different direction and cause a headwind, or tailwinds and stuff that is investable today that you see as potentially benefiting from tailwinds?
Well, games aren't going anywhere. Digital worlds aren't going. I mean, they're just growing. The demographics of people that are, like I said, it transcends every demographic. It's growing in revenue. It's growing in number of people playing. So I continue to see, like, of all things that are out there, this is just a sector that's not going anywhere. Now, of course, you need to be good at what you do. You need to know how to get your products out in front of people. It's not an easy sector to do well in. But it's growing, and that the headwinds are primarily through the competition and the competition for people's attention, but not on whether that industry has the opportunity to grow audience wise or monetarily. And that, again, that's where, my point of view is like, yeah, I don't know exactly what's the right business. I don't know what our business model should be. We have a number of things that we want to try. That's again why we've kind of been pushing in this lab direction, is like, there's just a lot of things that need to be tried. It's a lot of this is the first time that it's ever been done, but that the conservation sector and those that are interested in biodiversity can no longer ignore this gigantic sector and the gigantic audience that sector attracts, when we think about how it can benefit conservation and how conservation can penetrate into it.
Great. Alex, are you still there? Maybe not. All right. I think so. Did you have anything you want to summarize? Like, I was thinking about a little short breakout room before Yana comes on with Frog Geeks. I think she's hopefully around. I didn't double check that. It looks like it.
Yeah.
Yep. And so did you have anything you want to finalize?
No, I think, yeah, I guess, in short, I've put my details up there. If people have ideas, again, like I said, we're effectively starting from scratch again in a little way, but with all sorts of knowledge, with six years of knowledge and products and market experience, et cetera, that are out there, but now rethinking about the way, we go about this. So, one of the first steps is finding the right set of first partners, and so yeah, if anybody has thoughts on that or wants to talk about this further, or this has piqued their interest, please reach out. And thanks so much for the opportunity.